Yeah, so for everyone who is here, this session will be structured into two parts, where the first part we'll ask some questions to the speaker, and after that we're actually open for audience questions. So so feel free to ask your questions to the general chat, so that then we'll ask it in the second half of the session. Yeah. It's probably a good time. I think at least we have some people, so we'll get started first. Welcome everyone to the Career Snapshot series organized by MIT Club of Boston. We will be having a fireside chat with the speaker to get more insights into his particular career. Feel free to send your questions to the general chat, and both me and my co-host Isabel I will address them in the later half of the session. So our speaker today, Hoke Tang, is a principal at Flagship Pioneering. Hoke, so you are working at Flagship Pioneering as on co-founding as well as managing a new biotech startups. So these all sound very impressive. So can you give a bit more detail on, like, in simple terms of what you actually do at work?
Question. Well, first of all, it's great to be here.
Okay, I think you're muted. I think I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Okay, you're not. Okay, yes.
Okay,
yes.
okay, great,
okay, yes.
great.
Yes.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Definitely honored to tell you about what I do. So Flagship is a company that creates biotech companies. It's sort of like a factory for biotech companies, if you will. So what we do every day is exactly that, right? We put the wheels on, make sure they're running smoothly, and that involves a lot of different steps. So first, there's a lot of thinking through what are some great biotech companies to start. And that's what we do in the first phase, and then connecting with experts, building a small team to prove some concept out, build out the intellectual property, continue to grow the team, hire executives, solve management challenges, decide where the company should go, right? Talk to investors, talk to partners. So that's really what we do, different parts, different days, and at different times, but all of the above.
Yeah, and it sounds very interesting. It sounds very like multifaceted, meeting investors and all that. And I guess trying to drive impact, because right now it's like biotech is a big thing. So trying to drive companies that really improve human health, which is are really important. So do you have any like notable achievements in your work, or moments that you are particularly proud of the things that you've done like over the past few years?
Yeah, so as part of Flagship, right, I've been a co-founder, really like the part of the founding team of 5 of these companies, and that they're still alive, employing over, I think, depends on the day, of course, but over 200 people, and that's really something that I'm particularly proud of, is creating these jobs, meeting these people, and really being able to drive the science forward, right? We've had one, product launch on the agricultural side in Italy, and that's something that's been very interesting as well. But in terms of other kinds of milestones, right? It's really the thing that keeps these companies running is funding, and being able to attract enough funding, especially in this funding environment, right? With the market being what it is, a lot of these companies have been able to raise even in challenging times, and that's something that I'm very proud of.
Actually that sounds quite impressive. I guess especially given the current like funding environment and all that. And then, so do you have any like advice or suggestions for other people who are trying to look for like maybe like start a company now? Like, is now the best time, or should they like maybe postpone to later, or any advice from your side?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. What I'd say is that funding is still there, right? There's still a lot of money going around that still needs to be deployed. And especially if you're starting a company, right? Most investors in biotech are really looking at the two ends of the risk spectrum, right? There are companies that are just starting, where the valuations are low and therefore attractive for an investor. And those are usually the seed and Series A companies. The market for that is still pretty good, right? People have money, valuations are lower, people are more reasonable, it's easier to hire. And then at the later stage, if you have real assets, right? If you're in healthcare, right? Taking things to clinical trials, right? There's still lots of appetite for that. Pharma, because valuations are low, pharmas are more willing to partner, right? And really try and acquire companies as well. So the appetite there is still high. It's really the mid stage where the people who do seed and Series A stages are tapering off, and the people who want really de-risked assets haven't picked up yet. That's sort of the more difficult stage, right, where you're trying to prove it out. So now still a great time to start companies, and especially, from a hiring perspective, right? Like lots of people are looking, and so it's not a bad time to build a team.
Yeah, that's quite insightful. I guess I didn't realize that there was the early companies that are still good and still money for that. And I guess once you have assets, you're still very valuable to other companies and to big farmers. And so that's good to know. So I guess for people that want to join small biotechs and all that, it's still very much alive, and there's still lots of funding for that. Yeah. So I guess maybe somewhat linked to this. So like in terms of your work, I guess you have all your achievements and all that. So what are some other challenges that you have faced in your work that maybe you might not have known before starting your work? And then how have you overcome them? So you mentioned the funding challenge. So do you have like other challenges that you have faced in your work, maybe in in managing the companies or other stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So really, right, like startups are trying to do what a Pfizer might do with 10,000 people with, a team of like 5 people, right? So it is challenging. Everything is a challenge, and it's that's part of the fun, right? A day without challenges would be a little boring, right? In terms of the types of challenges that are most common, there's really 2 that are that really stand out, right? One is that companies grow, and companies are groups of people, and people have different personalities, people have different wants and needs, right? And there's a lot of challenges associated with creating a smooth running organization, right? And this is where great management can really differentiate from a less well-managed company, especially in this kind of environment when companies are running lean and you have to make hard decisions, right? So those are the types of challenges that actually, can be harder to solve than the actual scientific or technical challenge that your startup is seeking to do, right? And then the other challenge, besides, of course, the obvious scientific challenge, is really the what you might call product market fit, right? How do you find a niche for yourself to differentiate? How do you figure out where your science or your therapy or your technology is really going to be a winner, and where it's not? Because you have to, with a small team, you have to find an area and really focus, double down on it. You can't really do everything at once, right? That's just not an option, and having that focus enables you to really drive something special, right? And that's the challenge, is figuring out what that is for that particular company.
Yeah. Those challenges both sound like challenges, but I guess it also sounds like it's a fun challenge to kind of tackle those. Because once you do find your product market fit, then I guess all your funding and everything else all comes in at that point.
Well, it's always all come in, right?
And I guess you also get a better prospects for the company once you manage to get past that hurdle.
Yeah, and you really have to have a core, right? A core insight, a core thought about why this is the way forward. We do a lot of engagements with consulting companies, right? Your McKinsey's, your Boston Consulting Groups, and those people can help you figure out that strategy piece of how you execute on the vision a little bit. They can gather data for you, but they cannot tell you, right, what the core is, and that's something you have to have for yourself.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess one more question. Can you share some of what are some of the 3 things that you wish you knew before you started your job, that maybe that's not very obvious from the outside, that you hope that you knew before starting?
Yeah. So So there's a lot of them, right? I think just to give you guys some background, right? I did my PhD over at MIT. I'm an engineer, scientist, whatever you want to call it. And one of the things you don't learn, right, being doing a PhD is you go really deep into the science. You think about all the technology challenges and scientific challenges, but it's really the management and the people challenges that are some of the hardest to solve, right? Going back to that earlier question, and so one thing that I really wish I would have learned more of, right, and something that I had to pick up really quick is how to do that, how to deal with difficult people sometimes, how to encourage people who are down when things aren't working, and they're going to work in the future, but not right now. And just how to build, recruit, and motivate a team of really smart people and make sure they're all going in the same direction. Right, that's a challenge that is very difficult. It has to be solved, individually for each team, for each company, and not the same way every time. So that's one. And then another one is really thinking about how you can strategically position, right? Going back to the challenges as well. I think they're really, really interrelated, right? How to think about what's out there, what's available, and how you can differentiate, because that's something that you can really get wrapped up into the excitement around the technology, what it can do in a lab, what it can do as code or whatever it might be, right? But without having that niche, without having that outcome that is valuable to society, right? It becomes very hard, and lots of companies start with a lot of excitement, and then they find out, right, millions and millions of dollars later, right, that fit wasn't there, and that's just something that is something to really learn to think about early on. And then lastly, it's a lot of communication, right? Being well versed in communicating, understanding how people are thinking, how people are feeling, whether it's investors, whether it's board members, whether it's employees, right? Thinking through how to communicate to them, having talking points, and putting yourself in their shoes, right? That's something that is a very useful skill that you have to learn in order to really get your message across. And without that, it's very difficult for people to respond well in the way that you want them to.
Wow. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of things that you don't really learn in school.
Yeah,
a lot of these things. I guess in school it's just the science, the technology, and that's it.
we have this vision of sort of this lone genius, right, going out and inventing things, but that is really not how the world works. And you rarely see those types of people succeed in what they do, and there are lots of really smart people doing that, but the really big impacts are from when you're able to motivate hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of people towards a common goal. And that's how you can create these game-changing companies.
Wow, that's quite inspiring to hear, like these skill sets. So I guess to kind of slightly tie in but shift a bit. So I think some of the people that attend today are probably like interested, but as an interested maybe transitioning, or interested in just maybe entering into VC or maybe startups. So do you have any suggestions for how they can position themselves as qualified candidates? So like what kind of skill sets, what kind of personality traits they should have, so that they'll be like they'll be seen favorably by maybe you or other people to enter Flagship, or like or to do those kind of jobs?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in general, my advice for people who want to work with startups, right, is just go do it, because there's no better experience than hands-on experience. And Flagship is a very large organization at this point, right? We have over 90 startups that we've launched in our ecosystem, and there are probably hundreds. I haven't checked the full listing, but I'm sure they're on the order of hundreds of positions available, all the way from RAs and engineers to VPs and even CEOs, CSOs, right? So there's something for everyone there, and lots of things that you can bring to the table. One of the most important attributes to have when it comes to joining especially a small startup, is the ability to be flexible, right? And one of the benefits of joining a startup is that you're exposed to a lot more things than you would be otherwise, because as even if you're joining as a scientist or research associate, you're intimately involved in a 3-person company of planning what the strategy is, because you have to understand the strategy to make the right experiment that gives you the result that you need to either get the next round of funding or partner interest. Right, so you'll get that exposure, and that's something that is invaluable for career growth, right? People in large companies, there are entire divisions that do these kinds of things, and you don't see them when you're in those companies unless you're at a higher level, and that's something that really has been helpful for people's personal and career growth. In terms of attributes, right, it's going to be flexibility, and then really being comfortable with ambiguity, the ability to make decisions, right? Not be paralyzed under time and, shall we say, cost pressure, right? So in a startup, the enemy is always time, right? The burn rates for a like 40, 50 person startup is close to $2 to $3 million a month, something like that. And headcount is a big chunk of it. But you think about that, and if you're making $100,000 purchasing decision, right? Compare that to how much money you'd waste just carrying the company over longer, right? That's a huge thing. And being able to make those decisions rapidly and make good decisions is something that we look out for. And there are many ways to get that kind of experience, but really highlighting that type of thing is helpful, and then really having a get it done attitude, right? In startups, there really aren't that much room for what you might call presiders, right? People who generally just supervise, right? Most people are very hands-on. Even the senior people, CEOs, CSOs, will be intimately involved and able to contribute to some of the decision making, and making sure that things are running smoothly, and otherwise, right, then the outcomes aren't always as good.
Yeah, I guess makes sense. As in, startups will be very lean, so everyone has to do like wear multiple hats and do multiple things. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess it's good to know about these attributes of people. So I guess so assuming someone has the attribute or is interested in going into like a startup or VC, so what kind of networking events could they go to get introductions to people in that area? Like, are there like things that they can attend to better know people, to get the ins to get in?
Yeah, so just to clarify also, right, it holds this true on the VC side as well, right? Most VCs are experienced operators of companies that, startups that they've operated and have many of the same qualities, because they're sitting on these boards and trying to figure out the same kinds of things that people on the ground, right, are trying to do as well. In terms of ways to get into startups, right, applying for roles is probably the easiest. There are other events, right, conferences where you can find a lot of these companies depending on the space. In Boston, there are meetup groups. There are there are different specialty biotech groups that are good places to connect, right? But really joining one is one of the better ways to really experience it and understand what it's like, right? And so meeting those people through applications is not a bad way to do it. In terms of VC, so Flagship has the Fellows program, which I'd encourage you all to look more into, especially if you're doing a PhD and about to graduate. That's a special opportunity to really dive deep into understanding what Flagship's process is, and then also potentially work for Flagship in a similar position, like an associate is what we call it, the starting role, where you're helping people start companies, or as a person in a startup, right? There are many roles again, and heavily encourage you to visit our website to look for them.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining so much on how to get in. And then, so now we are open to audience questions. If you have particular areas that you want to ask Hockey more about, or like more questions on maybe like how to get in and all that, Piyush, So Isabel, do you have any questions to ask?
Yes. Thank you. We received already 3 questions so far. The first one is around IP. And it's actually a 2-part question, so I'm just going to read. It says, how do you value platform IP versus IP for the drug substance? And kind of follow-up of that is how to best untangle initial IP from an academic founder with rich true versus company IP.
Okay. These are great questions. This is a very, very deep question too. It's a sophisticated audience. So I think of intellectual property sort of as an onion, right? Like if you've seen that Shrek quote, but basically you have the outer layers, which are less protective, right? And then the core, which is, more protective. The most protective IP is on the actual thing that you're selling, because that's what's really blocking. And that's the thing that someone, can readily infringe on, because just because you can patent something doesn't mean it's necessarily enforceable, even though you can patent it, right? So that's where the platform versus, maybe you call it pipeline or product IP is, but the product IP is the strongest, but the platform IP is sort of a fallback. In terms of how you disentangle IP from an academic institution, company IP versus an academic institution, right? Academic institutions, look, I'll be honest, right? There are some academic institutions that are very easy to work with, and some academic institutions that have very strong IP teams, and others that don't. So a lot of that foundational platform IP from an academic institution may or may not be valuable, but having a good lawyer, right, take a look at it and evaluate it. That's what these people do all day. They're not cheap. But that's the best way to evaluate whether or not you even need to in-license, certain piece of the IP. But there's also relationship building through that process. So if if you're building a relationship with the university, you want with people in the university, you want to maintain on good terms with them. So you might license their IP, even if it's not as blocking as you would expect, right? And in therapeutics, right, there's exceptions for research and development in the therapeutic space that you can use other people's IP for. So some types of IP are even less protective than they otherwise would in the US versus other countries. But in general, taking that drug substance, drug product IP, that's going to be the most valuable.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is around communication. And it comes from the scientific kind of someone that is perhaps more in the field. If you have a profile of a scientist or you're an expert in machine learning and you're trying to communicate with upper level management, C-suite people who are experts in biotech, how do you deal when you feel people are not listening or when they think they might know more about you? And if you are the expert on the field, do you have any tips on how to best deal with management, with investors when you are the expert and they feel they know more than you?
That's a loaded question right there, right? I think one of the things that we have to do is really step back and understand where they're coming from. And if you can think about why they're responding in a certain way, and some people are just hard to communicate with, but that's usually not the case, right? Usually it's misalignment in terms of the level of communication. So for example, right, an executive is thinking about, or investors think about the impact on the market, right? If you tell them that your model, your AI model, has a 98% score on something, right? That doesn't really tell them why this is important. So that's maybe an example of if you can up level to, that this accuracy means that compared to all these other competitors, we're differentiated, we're beating, and we have a path to a market that's 3 months faster than they could possibly ever do for a new product, right? That might be at the level at which you get a better response, right? In terms of if someone is, think they might be more knowledgeable in an area than you are. I mean, sometimes they might be right, and that's something to take into considerations. But other times, it's really anchoring based on the facts, right? It's if you if there is a dispute in terms of facts, right, of what the strategy is and principles behind making a decision, right, laying that out clearly is really helpful because people respond well when you're doing this in a logical manner, and it's very objective, and it's not based on personality, it's not based on, you know, how they're feeling at the moment, right? And those that can avoid, you know, defensiveness or impulsive, you know, decision making when it's, you know, harder to dispute the facts themselves, but really coming at it empathetically and helping them come to the same conclusion as you, right, is the way to get people to make decisions, you know, in a joyful way.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is around, and time back to your answers on funding drying up and the market. You mentioned the market's still good to, you know, to get funding, but you know, it being things a little bit more difficult, has the bar been raised? And how do you look for and how to determine the runway for a company?
Great question. So the bar has been raised, right? And a lot of that is due to there are different types of money, right? And there's a colloquialism in the community, right? There's smart money, right? Which are people who've been investing in a space for a very long time. They're very targeted investors. They're usually ex-operators. They know what they're doing. And then there's money that comes in when something is hot and it just goes all over the place, right? And so the bar, you know, for those like this, the smart investor types has not really been raised. I think they're applying the same bars. What has been raised is that there's less money available outside of those guys because everyone has left the field, right? Everyone else has been burned and left the field, and it's really about making sure. And you know, these people are usually very happy to hear about new things in chat, right? But make sure that you have solid arguments for why this is the right move, why this is the right company, and you know, that the impacts, right, that are based on facts and principles and where the trends are going. So what an investor looks for is really three things, right? Like, is the idea believable, right, and in line with the trends that are going on? Is the team, right, believable, and is there a plan in place that will actually make money, right? Like you know, a lot of these investors target certain IRRs, like 40%, 50, 60, whatever it might be. And you have to have a model that shows that we think it's feasible to hit that, right? And if you don't, then it's hard to convince someone that you're someone to trust millions of dollars with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One final question on people are interested a little bit more in your background, and they're wondering if you could explain what drew you to Flagship, to this investment company, versus doing consulting or following a path in a specific startup. If you can talk about the trade-offs, or how did you came up to this?
Yeah. So what we do is very unique, right? We start companies and we run them. Consultants are brought in to solve a problem in 6 weeks, right? Sometimes, and sometimes longer. And they get paid, you know, a pretty chunk of change for not sleeping during those 6 weeks. But basically, they don't stay for the long term. They don't implement what they recommend, right? And if you're starting a company, you not only have to implement what you recommend, right? You have to build it too. And so that's really the big difference between consulting or, you know, having a specific or joining in that role in a later stage kind of company. In terms of versus startups, right? I think the main difference joining a company like Flagship is you're doing this over and over again. There's institutional learning. You're learning how to build companies, which is very different from some of the roles in the company, right? Like, I personally do not go and do things with mice and testing compounds on mice or things like that. And even though, you know, my background, I could have done some of those things, but the people that I hire to do those are really, really good at it. They've done it for many, many years. And at the startup, they're learning not just how to do that even better, they're coming up with new ways to do it that, you know, industry dogma has prevented, right? And so there's a lot of opportunities to learn different things, even as a scientist or as, you know, part of a company like Flagship.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I'll probably just ask one wrap-up question. Can you encapsulate in a few words your career advice to all of us here today? Yeah, just like a distillation of what you feel is the most important thing to take up.
Yeah, if you're interested in a startup, right, go join one. You'll gain valuable experience, and you'll be able to grow faster than before.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, Hoke, for all your insights that you've given to all of us. And thanks to all the rest of you for being here today. Just a shout out, so if you have interest in other speakers or careers, please feel free to let me and Isabel know, and we'll see whether we can find people to talk about that particular career that you're interested in as well. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye.